Alright, what's up everyone, I'm Faloki, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Julio Jones. Now, the Seattle Seahawks have somehow meandered their way into the trade talks for Julio Jones, and I just want to give my thoughts on it. Before we get into the video though, I would like to apologize for my complete and utter lack of consistency recently. I've been working on some things that I think will be pretty cool, but I'm pretty new to this stuff, so I'm still trying to figure it out. It's taking a lot of time, but hopefully I'll be able to show them off sometime soon. I think they're pretty cool, but still got to work out some kinks. Now, before we actually talk about Julio Jones, the possibility of the Seahawks trading for him and stuff like that, I want to kind of bring up the lack of morality of what Shannon Sharp actually did to Julio Jones. This whole news thing broke with Julio Jones deliberately saying himself that he was not returning to Atlanta whatsoever. And that came on a call on national television with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people watching live. And Julio Jones, I don't believe he was actually told that he was on live television until Shannon Sharp was hanging up on him saying, "Hey, we're live." And then he hung up. I think that was pretty bad for Shannon Sharp to do. It doesn't seem like Julio really cares, because, the news was already out. Everyone kind of saw the writing on the wall that he's not returning to Atlanta. He's going to be traded. But to not tell somebody that they're on national television while you call them about something that's very important within their life at the moment, it's kind of messed up. Maybe Julio Jones knew he was on live television. Maybe he doesn't care. Either way, I think it was still a pretty bad thing to do. Now, when it comes to the possibility of the Seattle Seahawks trading for Julio Jones, the first real question is, if talent was the only thing looked at, should the Seattle Seahawks make the trade? Yes. But to look at some of the things that actually determine the possibility of a trade like this happening, you have to look at the trade value. Trade value is very important because obviously that is what you are going to be giving up to get a player like Julio Jones. And thankfully enough for every single team in the league except for the Atlanta Falcons, the trade value is much lower than it should be for Julio Jones because he has specifically stated he is not going back to Atlanta. Atlanta's hand is forced, so they're not going to be able to charge teams an egregious amount of value for Julio Jones because even though he is one of, if not the best wide receiver in the entire NFL, you cannot get a lot for him because there is no chance he's going back to your team. It's not like you can say, okay, none of your guys' trades were good enough, we're just going to keep him for next year, because he said he does not want to go back to Atlanta. So they are forced to trade him, which means they're going to be forced to trade him for whatever the top bidder is going to give them, no matter if that's what they want or not. Now, just about everyone when talking about the Julio Jones situation is sort of flip-flopping on if a first rounder would be worth it or not. Our team's actually going to be offering first rounders for a player that they know is not going to return back to their team. Would a second rounder and maybe some late rounders, a second and third, actually work out to get someone like Julio Jones, or do you have to give a first rounder? I haven't heard a lot of talk about teams actually being willing to give up a first round pick for Julio Jones because of this certain situation of him guaranteeing that he's not going back to Atlanta. But the thing is, should the Seattle Seahawks do it? Obviously, the Seahawks have shown that they're willing to give up draft capital, including multiple first-round picks for players, but obviously multiple first-round picks is not going to be necessary for a trade like this. But would it actually be worth giving up a lot of draft capital to get a guy like Julio Jones when we already have a very solid wide receiver group? Now, I'm not going to sit here and argue that Julio Jones is not better than anybody in our wide receiver group. Julio Jones obviously is better than Tyler Lockett, better than DK Metcalf, and better than every single player below DK Metcalf on the depth chart, alright? Now, that is an absolute fact. No one can really argue that. But would it be worth giving up draft capital, players, any trade value to take on a humongous contract that Julio Jones has for what isn't really that huge of an upgrade? If Julio Jones were to be brought in by a team this season, he would have a $23 million cap hit going into next year and then have 2 more years of making quite a lot of money. Now, teams are obviously willing to manipulate the salary cap, manipulate the money, and figure out a way to make it work for such a great player that Julio Jones is. But should the Seattle Seahawks do that? Now, of course, we can restructure Bobby Wagner, Russell Wilson. I would not doubt that Russell Wilson would be open to restructuring his contract if it meant getting someone like Julio Jones. But would it be completely worth it? Julio Jones is an absolutely amazing talent, but we have Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, 2 arguably top 10 guys in the entire NFL in the wide receiver group. We just drafted a wide receiver in the 2nd round that'll play a pretty big role for us in our new offense. And honestly, we have some really good depth behind D'wayne Eskridge as well. We have a very solid wide receiver group, and with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett arguably both being in the top 10 for wide receivers and definitely being top 15, both of them, would it actually be really necessary to get Julio Jones? It's kind of at that state of diminishing returns. If you've ever taken an economics class, diminishing returns, Yeah, you get better, but is it worth the price you're paying to get marginally better than you were before? Like if we were going from having Tyler Lockett and then absolutely nobody else in the wide receiver group, and then we got Julio Jones, huge uptick in how good our wide receiver group is. But if we go from having Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, just spent a second round pick on D'wayne Eskridge, having really good depth, getting Julio Jones would be like it's a bit better, but like it's for as much that you give up, is it really worth it? Now, this may be an absolutely terrible analogy, but hear me out real quick. Say you got a pretty decent job, you're living a pretty good life, you got a Toyota Corolla. It gets you comfortably, reliably, and consistently from point A to point B. But then one day you see a Lamborghini for sale, and boy oh boy would you love to have a Lamborghini, because who wouldn't like to have a Lamborghini? But of course, to get that Lamborghini, you'd have to finagle the financial situation of the future, which would possibly mess you up and may or may not be worth it for the minimal gain that you get of going from a nice reliable Toyota Corolla to a real nice Lamborghini. Is it really going to get you from point A to point B that much better to where you could put your future on the line for it? Would you really get enough out of that cool new Lamborghini that you wouldn't get out of the Toyota Corolla, that it's worth putting so much money into it just to get something that's marginally better than what you had before? Now, of course, it's like Julio Jones and DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. There is no arguing that a Lamborghini is better than a Toyota Corolla, but is it that much better that you really want to put that much into it? I don't think so. That's kind of how I'm thinking with the Julio Jones situation. Horrible analogy aside, Julio Jones, amazing talent. I wouldn't be mad if the Seahawks got him. Now, one thing that I will say is if the NFC West teams are going for them, the Seattle Seahawks should outbid every single NFC West team there is, all right? If the Cardinals, 49ers, or Rams go for Julio Jones, the Seattle Seahawks should give up more than they do. Because if he's going to the NFC West, he better come to the Seattle Seahawks. But if you have a team like the New England Patriots going out and being the top bidder for Julio Jones and giving up a first-round pick and a third-round pick or something like that, would it even be worth trying to outbid them when you're really not going to be affected by them having Julio Jones, and you having Julio Jones isn't going to be that much better than what you had before? Now, that's kind of how I feel about it. I'm kind of all over the place right now, but a lot of people think that we should really go for Julio Jones. I don't think any single team in the NFL will not go for Julio Jones. Everyone's going to throw out an offer. It's just the matter of, will teams like the Seattle Seahawks, who have a very solid wide receiver group, go and try and outbid a team like the New England Patriots that kind of struggle in the wide receiver group and try and get Julio Jones instead of them giving up a lot of value in the process? Now, personally, I don't think we should. I think we should offer more than any team in the NFC West, but other than that, I don't think we really should go too hard on Julio Jones. Julio Jones is an amazing player. The Falcons probably aren't even going to trade him within the NFC, so I don't really think we need to worry about it too much. Julio Jones, he'd be an absolutely amazing player. He'd be that Lamborghini. But when we have DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett being them nice old Toyota Corollas, do we really need a Lamborghini at the end of the day when we can get everything from point A to point B consistently, when we can have great wide receivers making great plays without having to give up more draft capital and take on more money? But that's just my thoughts on the matter. Let me know down below in the comments what you think about this situation. Should the Seahawks trade for Julio Jones? Should they not? Why or why not? Just let me know down below in the comments what you think. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and with that, I'd like to thank you for watching. Have a great day.